Hello and welcome to this special C-Media production from Epic Studios in Norwich in the UK. I'm Matthew Hudson. Very shortly, the people of Europe, 500 million of them, will be going to the polls to elect a new European Parliament. Of course, that's only if all of them turn out to vote. It's likely the turnout will be far fewer than that, especially with fewer young people voting. Is that because the citizens of Europe are becoming disengaged from the European project? In Britain, perhaps more than in many of the other EU countries, Euroscepticism appears to be on the march. Shortly, our audience of mostly young people, among them students from the UEA and Howest College in Belgium, will be able to put those points and more to our panel, which includes European parliamentarians and candidates. And we'll be joined by our partner organisation, Focus TV in West Flanders, where students from the other side of the North Sea will also be following the debate. But at a time when youth services are being cut in many countries and the costs of being a student, for example, are rising, is it wise of young people to opt out of the political process at any level, local, national or European?
Why young people should vote? First of all, because we can make a huge difference in the elections. If you take England, less than 50% of those aged 16 to 24 were registered to vote in the last elections. Of that 50%, less than 50% voted. Compare these figures to the 80% of over 35 and the 96% of over 65 that were registered to vote.
The European Union is important for people of all ages, but I'd say more generally that young people need to engage in political institutions because the issues that they face are as relevant as the issues of people of middle age or older age. Why do governments give more emphasis to the needs of older people? Because they vote more than younger people do.
A high influx in the young voters registration will shift the policies, because politicians, they work for their audiences. You're making a difference from the first moment you register to vote. You can have a say in the issues that affect you.
Our panel today consists of, from the far right as you look at them, UK Independence Party MEP Stuart Agnew, a farmer by profession. Stuart, whose party would rather the UK left Europe altogether, was elected to the European Parliament in 2009. By contrast, next to him we have Andrew Duff MEP. Andrew is a UK Liberal Democrat, a member of the European Parliament since 1999 and a strong proponent of European federalism and even closer integration. Vicki Ford is a Conservative MEP, first elected in 2009. An economist, she is Conservative spokesman for industry and research. MEP Richard Howitt, in the Parliament since 1994. Richard is Labour's European spokesman on foreign affairs. He was previously a local councillor in Harlow. Rupert Read is an academic at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. A Green local councillor, Rupert was an MEP candidate in 2009, narrowly missing out on selection. And Petros Fassoulas, neither an MEP nor a prospective candidate, is chair of the UK's pro-European pressure group, the European Movement. But enough of the introductions, now it's question time. And our first question comes from Tom Eastwood. Tom, are you here with us?
My question is, what is the benefit of joining the Eurozone, considering our pound is currently stronger than the euro?
Stuart, perhaps you'd like to kick that one off for us.
Well, there isn't any benefit in us joining the Eurozone. No benefit at all. The Eurozone, or the euro, is a political construct. If you're going to make one country out of 28 countries, you've got to homogenise everything. And one of those things is the currency. They had to have a single currency They launched it with a big fanfare a few years ago. The Maastricht Treaty allowed it to happen. And very soon it became apparent that a lot of the countries that were in it shouldn't have been in it. In other words, schoolboys playing rugby on Sunday morning suddenly found themselves playing at Twickenham on the Saturday afternoon. It's caused a lot of grief in those countries that are in it. We felt in UKIP that Greece certainly should get out of it. We underestimated the political desire of the European Union to keep this thing going. So effectively, Greece has now lost really all its sovereignty. It is run by something called the Troika, a combination of the European Central Bank, the Commission and the IMF. So no benefit to Britain. We want to keep right out of it. Unfortunately, we do get dragged into bailouts. And we have given Greece, I think, about £11 billion. We've lent Ireland 8. It's a liability we don't need. Thank you.
Andrew, I suspect we'll get a different response from you.
You will. And I would question your premise that the pound is stronger than the euro. Currencies fluctuate. That's what they do all the time. And the euro, as we all know, has been experiencing a protracted and quite deep crisis because the structure of it, the arrangements that we agreed to establish it were only partly formed, were only partly correct. The monetary part was there, but the political economy part of the argument was poor, was feeble. Gradually, we are restoring the euro to stability. We are sorting out the banking crisis. We are starting the process of economic recovery and employment growth. So although the question of British membership of the euro is not for now, I think it would be crazy to think that it is disappeared and that sometime we are not going to have to address that all over again. In the past, sterling has meant crisis. When you thought of sterling, you thought of sterling crisis.
Vicki Ford, I know this is an issue that you have very strong views on.
Well, number one, in the UK, we're not joining the euro, and my party, the Conservative Party, has made it very clear that we never intend to join the euro. It is in our interest as a country to try and have a stable trading partner with the majority of continental Europe, which is in the euro. So making sure that the Eurozone stabilises is in our interest, but we do not believe that we should have to pay for the Eurozone. So keeping the UK out of the Eurozone bailouts has been a key part of what the coalition government has done under the Prime Minister. The previous government signed us up to contribute to the Eurozone bailout fund. That has been stopped. A large part of my life at the moment is keeping ourselves out of the costs of their banking union when they pool their banks, and keeping ourselves out of their fiscal union. You may remember that we vetoed a treaty. The treaty would have given the EU power to decide over taxation policies in all of 28 countries. It would have done. It would have looked at debts and deficits and how you tax and spend. So keeping ourselves out of that has been a key part of the UK policy and what we're doing. So we want them to be able to stabilise. If they decide that the way to stabilise is by pooling of sovereignty, which is what they're doing at the moment, then that is their choice. I think it's a crazy choice, but that is their choice. And we're not going to stand in the way of it, but we are not joining the Eurozone. We're not going to pick up the bills for the Eurozone, and we're not going to get swept into their banking union or their fiscal union either.
Richard, what's the Labour Party's position on this?
Well, Labour kept Britain out of the euro, and we don't want Britain to join the euro. That's the simple answer there. But we have to understand that a lot of the Eurosceptic right in this country want to portray the difficulties of the last few years as difficulties of Europe, the euro, the Eurozone, and of Europe, and that countries, peripheral countries outside of the euro, like Iceland, collapsed just as much as the problems we've seen in Greece, in Portugal, and in Ireland. This is a recession that has been made by the banking crisis of the 2008 and the failure to properly regulate the banks. And for those on the right to try and blame Europe in some way misses the point, not least because Germany and France within the Eurozone have economically done much better than we have in Britain outside of it. But it is in our interest for the Eurozone to flourish. You know, it's very clear to say that. Europe is the single market for Britain, jobs in this region, in Norfolk where we're filming this, the businesses and the jobs, a third of which are dependent on our trade with the Eurozone, and therefore it is right that we support efforts to enable the Eurozone to reflame. We're not going to get recovery in Britain unless it does too. And we've just heard from the Conservative that it's a crazy choice that they're making, right? And we hear from David Cameron and George Osborne that they don't want to lecture the Eurozone, they're not part of it, and then they start doing it and telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing.
Said we're not
and this
going
is
to
the whole
stand in their
problem
way,
of the relationship under this government between Britain and Europe. Wanting to stand on the outside, distance ourselves, but then trying to lecture and then wondering why we're not so popular. And so Labour, no, we don't want to join the euro, but we do not want Britain marginalised and our influence lost in the way that we've seen under this Conservative-led government.
Rupert, I thought I saw you nodding slightly there while Richard was talking. The Greens and Labour in accord on this issue?
Well, what I was nodding at was Richard's extremely important point that the Eurozone crisis, excuse me, was not, if you like, born in Europe. It's a result of a worldwide financial crisis. And what I would urge you all to consider is what the real roots of that crisis were. Richard mentioned insufficient regulation of the banks, but I think we need to look wider than that. Basically what's happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years is that capitalism, the so-called free market, has been allowed to let rip. It's been allowed to go wild. And this has had absolutely disastrous consequences, both in terms of the financial crisis and in terms of the environmental crisis, which is gripping our planet and it is in the long run even more crucial. So we're going to have to make really big and deep changes if we're actually going to address those crises. And the question I would ask you as young people to ask yourselves here today is, are the parties that are before you on this platform willing to make big enough and deep enough changes? And I'm going to try to suggest to you that the Green Party is. Now, just a word specifically on the Eurozone crisis. There are two ways you can go if you've got a currency like the euro. We said in the Green Party when the euro was created that we didn't want to join it and that we were against it. We're an internationalist party, we're a pro-European party. So why did we say that? Well, we said it because the euro, if you have a currency like the euro across a whole load of states, you have to have, ultimately, political union and fiscal union in order to make it work. And that's what Andrew is saying. He's actually correct in that. You've got two choices. Either you basically become a superstate, or you will eventually face a crisis, like the crisis that the Eurozone has faced over the last few years. And we as Greens passionately believe that power should be devolved more to localities, to local areas, and that states should be preserved and not just be sucked into some kind of gigantic superstate across the whole of Europe. So it's possible to be an internationalist, to be a pro-European, and to say no to the euro. The Greens said it when it was created. We've been proved right.
Petros, you represent a pressure group. In what direction is your group exerting pressure?
Well, we try to inform the debate as much as possible about the benefits of EU membership and the process of European integration. And I'm not as experienced nor as knowledgeable as the elected or soon-to-be elected members of the European Parliament, but my career in politics has taught me one thing: never say never. And I'm surprised to hear Vicki rule out of hand the possibility that the UK will ever join the euro. I think that political decisions are based on economic and social conditions, and those tend to change. Nothing in life, especially not in politics, is absolute and eternal. So I think it's irresponsible for any politician, for that matter, to rule out of hand a decision that it's not up to the end of the day up to us. It's up to the electorate and up to future generations. But when it comes to the euro itself, and I think that's important to stress out, we live in a remarkably globalized world. The belief that we control our economy entirely is for the birds. If the Chinese start eating more meat, the cost of things in this country goes up. So it's important to decide what we want to do. Do we want to be part of a big community of nations, a big market like the European Union? Yes, we do. That makes us stronger. And the question goes further. It goes into the currency. We have a dominant dollar around the world used as a reserve currency. Do you know what the second reserve currency in the world is at the moment? The euro. And do you know that the Chinese also are propping up their currency to take its place up there with the dollar and the euro as a global reserve currency? So the question will eventually emerge for nations like the UK and others. Do they want to be alone, stuck in the winds of three major global currencies? Or the economic conditions might make sense to consider joining it? I'm not saying the UK should, and I'm not saying the UK shouldn't, but the politicians should be able to reconsider the facts when the time comes.
So we have a question now from Faye Parkin, who wants to ask a question regarding immigration, and I suspect that is going to provide some lively debate for us.
My question is, what effects does immigration have on UK citizens rather than the economy as a whole?
Andrew Duff, perhaps you could start with that one.
Well, so far as we need labour, both skilled and non-skilled, the effect on the economy is beneficial, and that's recognised by economists of all strands and colours and tendencies. And if you ask the British people if they understand that, the answer is yes. They understand that the migration from Europe has been fantastically important for the NHS, for our retail sector. There isn't a pub in Norwich that is not employing somebody from Central Europe, but also, of course, for farming. And so people approve of migration, and indeed they exploit it. The millions of Brits who are in Spain or the Tuscany prove that too. The problem is that if you bring it to your neighbourhood, to your own firm or factory, and there are scares that cheaper workers will take your employment or your council house, then of course there are serious and proper grievances. And we have to manage and explain and to argue the case for migration with an awful lot more care and skill than we have done in the past.
Vicki Ford, is this a clear-cut issue as far as you're concerned?
There's many, many different strands to it. First of all, you mentioned that I lead for us on research and industry. In the east of England, we have world-class science. We have world-class research happening here in Norwich, in Cambridge, in Hertfordshire, all over the place. We need to have a world-class pool of talent wanting to come and work in our companies, in our universities, etc. Andrew, Richard and I, though, have just been with the leader of Peterborough Council this morning, and he has pointed out that the very significant and rapid amount of immigration into that city has put a very, very large pressure on public services, and he needs finances to go with that. And having the sort of uncontrolled immigration that has happened under the previous government put too much pressure on public services in some very key parts of the east of England. So you need to be sensitive to that. Immigration is, of course, down by a third under the current government, but it's got to be dealt with in a sensitive manner. Then we have issues to do with migration not for work, but migration for welfare or healthcare benefits, and where our benefit system has been seen as a pull factor, people coming just for benefits. Now, there may be more stories about that than reality, but it is a concern, especially when you go and talk to people in those neighbourhoods, which is why the government has changed the rules to make it very clear that you can't come and just sign on, that you won't go on top of the housing list, that the housing lists are for local people as priority, and changed these pull factors, and to make sure that NHS costs, for example, get billed back to the country within the EU that you've come from. They don't just sit back on the British taxpayer because we can't afford it. All of those changes have been made. And we do need to look, especially if you're going to look at further enlargement, at the whole of the freedom of movement. It is a very, very important freedom, but it needs to come with it some ability to control, especially in the east of England, these areas where we've seen very significant impact on the public services. How do you do that? Do you do that with funds? Do you do that with some sort of limit? This is a serious discussion that we think merits a proper debate.
Richard Howitt, I mean, I think I'm right in saying that Labour has apologised for some of the measures it took during its last administration when it came to immigration. Would you do things differently in the future?
Yes, and we said that not putting transitional controls on newer member states joining the European Union, which we didn't do at the time, should have happened, and we would change that for the future. But when one hears some of the rhetoric from the Conservatives and UKIP on this issue, I do worry. We've heard again the words uncontrolled immigration. There was never uncontrolled immigration in Britain. The point system was brought in. The Prime Minister used to week by week see the immigration figures. There was someone in every embassy in Britain abroad checking the rules on who was coming in. Uncontrolled, it's wrong. Or benefit tourism. We've heard it again there. The House of Lords Select Committee asked the government to give evidence about how many people were coming from other European countries to Britain to claim benefits, and they couldn't provide it. The same the European Commission. And what the Conservatives and UKIP are doing are trying to fuel people's fear and insecurity. Now, you asked a question about how people feel. They do feel insecure. And it is because we've gone through this worst recession in any of our lifetimes. And people are worried about their jobs and their careers. You're young people looking for future careers. And they're worried about what they'll get paid and their security within that job too. And they're worried that that might be taken away. And Andrew is right that all of the evidence shows that the migrants that are coming in make us all better off, help our businesses, are essential to our National Health Service, and essentially where there are more migrants, there are more jobs for everyone. People don't feel that always. And that's why Labour at these European elections is very clear that we have to have decent, fair, firm standards for employment protection, so that cowboy rogue employers can't bring people in from other countries to undercut local workers' jobs. Everyone, irrespective of nationality, is welcome, but they're welcome if they play by the rules. Now, I'll just say this finally, Matt. This is an audience mixed between students from UEA in Norwich and Belgium. We're being watched over the internet through colleagues across the sea. How people feel about migration is, at its best, is about people sharing each other's different cultures, different histories, different traditions, making friendships that can be friendships for life. And you in this audience understand that, and that should be more widely understood in Britain too.
Rupert, I saw you nodding during part of what Vicki said and part of what Richard said there. I'd be fascinated to know what the Greens' position on immigration is.
Well, it's an extremely complex issue. The question is a very good one. To briefly encapsulate the complexity, I just, before I came here, had lunch at a nearby Indian restaurant run by some good friends of mine, recent migrants from India. It was absolutely delicious, and if I'd have been coming to this event 30 years ago, I wouldn't have had that delicious lunch before I came here, because there were virtually no people from the Indian subcontinent living in Norwich 30 years ago. And I think it's clear that they've enriched this fine city in which we're having this debate here this afternoon. But also there are things on the other side of the ledger. So, for example, it is clear that high levels of migration can be damaging to the wages of the lowest paid workers in our economy. The stats on that are very, very clear. We as Greens think that that should be addressed by looking to raise up standards around the world rather than just trying to batten down the hatches and keep people out. Right? So that's the contribution that we as Greens want to bring to this debate. Two simple points amidst the complexity. First point, we are British people, and British people are decent people. We must be welcoming to refugees. We must be welcoming to asylum seekers who are, in many cases, running away from persecution, from climate disaster, and so on and so forth. We must be welcoming to those migrants who are here. Decency, this is absolutely essential and non-negotiable. And second point, let's not spend quite as much time as we do talking about how to keep people out of this country. Let's spend more time talking about how to help other countries to help themselves such that not so many people want to flee their own country or move away from their own country. That's why I mentioned, for example, why don't we try to start moving towards having a living wage across the European Union so that people aren't desperately poor in Estonia and Poland and so on and wanting to come here? Why don't we start trying to produce really decent levels of proper aid to other countries, to help countries where people are, as I say, in some cases fleeing desperate conditions in order to come here? Let's try to make things better in the countries that migrants are coming from rather than just pulling up the drawbridge.
Petros, I mean, it's clear that people in countries like Poland and Latvia, I mean, they cherish the freedom of movement that they have now that they've not enjoyed in previous decades. But is it good for Britain that they're able to come here unchecked?
Well, as you probably guessed from my accent, I'm not from around here. I am one of those EU citizens, I'd like to call them, not immigrants, who have exercised that precious right to move across borders, study abroad, get to know another culture, settle myself in that country, and contribute to its economy and its cultural development. And I think that's what is the greatest achievement of the project of European integration. And it's one of the fundamental rights you enjoy. So whenever you hear anyone at a panel, on TV, anywhere else, suggesting that that right should be taken away from you, I suggest you say no. Because the free movement of people, the free movement of students, of workers, of retired individuals, is one of the greatest rights we enjoy because the European Union exists.
Stuart, perhaps I can bring you in here, because I mean, where I live in Cambridgeshire, the increase in migration from Eastern Europe does seem to have gone hand in hand with the rise of UKIP in towns like Ramsey. What would you like to say on this issue?
Well, first of all, I would agree with any of the panellists who said it's a complex subject, because it is. And I'm a farmer, and I can see the effect it has had on farming, which is you get highly motivated, hard-working individuals who are prepared to put the hours in and get the job done and actually work as a team. It is really very heartening if you go onto some of these fen farms where they have these big cabbage lifting machines, etc., to watch these people work. They are human robots, really, and they keep at it and they get bonuses and all the rest of it. They work really hard, and they do show up a lot of former indigenous people. I have to say that. These farms are utterly dependent on that type of worker. Now, how are they organised? If they're organised through a proper gangmaster who is paying the NIC, etc., and make sure that they get the wages they should, that's fine. But, as one or two of the panellists have pointed out, there is room for rogue people in here, and I can name three, but I mean I won't, but I can name three individuals from Eastern Europe who have made a fortune out of exploiting their fellow countrymen in this country. So migration in general is good for any economy. You do need it. The word here is managed or controlled. If you look at New Zealand, if you look at Australia, if you look at Canada, they have a points system. I mean, Richard was talking about a points system, but that only applies, if it ever applied at all, to countries outside the European Union. There are 480 million people living in the rest of the European Union, and they do have the right of free movement to come here. And you might say, well, freedom, how nice, etc.
That's right.
And yes, fine. However, it does bring problems with it. Come on, I haven't interrupted anybody else.
Let me just ask this, though. You say migration
Richard, let
is
Stuart
good.
finish, please.
You say that migration is good, right, and that it has to be well managed. But your party's policy is to stop all immigration for 5 years. So do you disagree with your own party's policy?
No, I'm not disagreeing. We're going to have a policy of work permits. That is our policy, where you come in here on work permits, because we know we do need these individuals, and I've just given an example. We do need migrant worker here, without a shadow of a doubt. We
Human
do need
robots.
it. But can I carry on, please? But you watch them work. It's wonderful to watch them. They really go for it. Now, if
Stuart, if you could wind up your answer, please.
Right. Housing. Okay. We have to build one house every 7 minutes to satisfy the requirements of net migration. We are not building a new house every 7 minutes. The stress of that has to come out somewhere. It comes out at the level of the first-time buyer, who is going to be you in a few years' time. So whereas I was able, when I was 28, earning £6,000 a year to buy a 3-bedroom detached cottage for £14,500, if that job was available now, it would pay no more than 30. What can you buy in Norwich for 75,000? This is the problem that the youth of our country are facing, because there aren't enough houses to go round.
We have many other questions from people in the audience here, including Sam Kenwood, who'd like to ask a question about fracking. Very topical indeed.
What are your opinions on fracking and the EU influence on energy policy at the moment?
Vicky, perhaps you could kick us off on that one.
Well, I think we need affordable, sustainable and secure energy. And those are the three elements you need. Is it affordable? Is it sustainable? Is it from secure sources? And in the past 6 years, energy prices in Europe have gone up by 40%, but in the USA they've gone down by 4%. And that has a real impact, especially on manufacturing industry when they're thinking about where to go. And in the past couple of months, I've met representatives from the glass industry, cement industry, fertilizer industry, all telling me how unless we look at the affordability of energy, there's going to be more plants moving outside EU borders and fewer jobs and manufacturing plants inside EU borders. That does not necessarily make for a cleaner planet either, because the production is just being moved elsewhere. So I think we need to treat very seriously the need to have lower carbon. Climate change is a threat, but we also need the affordability. And fracking, provided it's properly regulated and properly looking at the environmental issues on each potential site and making sure you manage the water issues and the chemical issues, etc., fracking can play a part, as does traditional fossil fuels, as does new nuclear, as does renewables, as does energy efficiency and energy saving measures. And they are all part of what you need to have.
Richard, Labour wins the next election next year. What happens to fracking in this country?
We are ahead in the polls. Thank you for reminding everyone. The first thing to say is here we are again in Norfolk with the major interconnector with gas coming into Britain in North Norfolk, with the very, very important offshore industry still for our country, essentially based in East Anglia. And I am delighted with work that I've personally been involved with and has been led locally, creating almost a European capital for renewable energy in Lowestoft, half an hour from here, and trying to build a grid across the North Sea with 3 other European countries to actually realise the benefits of offshore wind power, all of which, by the way, if the Conservatives, as they do, threaten our membership of the European Union, would be threatened in itself with many jobs to follow. So very, very important for this region and for our membership of the European Union. Now, fracking on its own, I believe there is an insecurity in energy supply. I think we can't afford to rule out any one energy solution. We have to look to different solutions. So I wouldn't rule out fracking altogether. But I do have a problem with the Conservative-led government in this country actually saying to local authorities, who they've cut more than central government, our councils are being bled dry, right? But they're saying you can have a subsidy for allowing fracking, which you're not allowed to promote recycling, for example. And I've just been at a meeting with this Conservative MEP where she's spoken out against recycling targets. I think they just don't get it.
I didn't.
But what all of us have to get is that global warming is happening. That by 2050, we'll be using up 3 planets' worth of resources, and it isn't sustainable. We're recording this at a time
Sorry,
of supreme weather
Richard,
events,
you just accused me of
whereby
saying
we've
something
seen
I have
flooding
never
across
said.
Norfolk and across East Anglia, where the fields are underwater as we speak. And it is connected with global warming. There is a sustainability crisis, and fracking is a fossil fuel.
Rupert Read, I mean, I'd put it to you that most of the population doesn't just want cheap energy, it pretty much demands cheap energy. As far as the Greens are concerned, can fracking play any part in that at all?
No.
Thank you, Rupert. If you want to say a few more words on this occasion, that would be fine.
We are the only party that's resisting the allure of fracking. Fracking might be lower carbon than other forms of fossil fuel energy, but one of the terrible dangers, and there are many that come with it, is that it releases, or at least can release, very significant amounts of methane. Methane as a global overheating gas is about 10 to 12 times as powerful as carbon. And if you get levels of methane release along the levels that we've been seeing in the United States, then fracking will have absolutely no climate benefit whatsoever. And that's on top of all the other stuff about polluting the water supply, destroying the countryside's look, etc., etc. So we say a very clear no to fracking. We say a very clear no to nuclear. What sane person after Fukushima really wants to go nuclear? What do we put our weight behind? We call for an energy revolution in the east of England, in Europe. We want to see a massive effort put into renewables. And here in the east, we're ideally sited for this. We're already starting to get there with wind and solar. The huge area that's still remaining to be properly exploited, to be properly invested in, is the sea. And the potential for tidal power and wave power around our coasts is absolutely huge. And what's more, we can lead it, and lots of good jobs can be produced in the process, and it can help stop coastal erosion and the destruction of the Broads. If we put tidal barrages in the right places, if we put wave devices in the right places, we can get a win-win-win. Let's have an energy revolution in this country and in this region. Forget all this outdated nonsense that you hear from the rest of the panel.
Petros, is this an issue that European movement has a position on?
Well, very much so. The advantage of the European Union is that it brings together 28 nations to agree common positions on issues that affect citizens across Europe. And let's face it, protecting our environment and making sure that the new generation coming after us will have a clear air, clear water, and an environment that is safe to live in is remarkably important. And the EU, as has already been said, is leading in that area. And exactly because we can take decisions together, collectively, as 28 nations, without undercutting each other, we have been able to adopt some very ambitious proposals, which are actually looked at by the rest of the world. In the process of a global agreement, the EU policies are a benchmark. And people are coming around, following the leadership of the European Union, which, by the way, has also been led by the UK. It's one of the areas where UK policy has become EU policy, and it shows the degree to which our influence within the EU allow us to project that influence globally.
Stuart Agnew, would you like fracking under your farmland?
It wouldn't worry me in the slightest degree. I'd far rather that than it was see our countryside just littered with this useless ironmongery of hundreds of acres of, and I mean it, hundreds of acres of solar panels, and then the wind turbines that completely obliterate the horizon, all for nothing. But you asked basically two questions. You said, what about fracking, and then what about the EU's energy policy? Well, on fracking, UKIP are in favour of it. It's actually a lifeline to this country. We can get some cheap energy. Thank goodness we can be competitive and get going on this gas, which is... The Greens, of course, say how terrible it's all going to be, all the dangers. If methane is a byproduct of this, what's wrong with methane? You can use it as an energy source.
No, it leaks, Stuart, that's the point.
Well, even if it does leak.
If it leaks at a rate of over 4%,
Look,
then
I never interrupt anybody, Chairman. I don't like being interrupted.
That's fair enough.
Do we have a deal on this?
Yes, Stuart, please continue.
You asked me a question. I replied.
Now, now I've lost my thread.
Methane.
Methane. One of the biggest producers of methane is rotting equatorial forests. That's what produces a lot of methane, vegetation rotting in the presence of water. And of course you have hundreds of thousands, millions of ruminants emitting methane all the time. It is a natural process. There it is. It then goes up and forms one of the greenhouse gases. We need some level of that. Now, looking at the EU's energy policy, it's hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless. Because they have to subsidise these solar farms and these wind turbines to the extent that it makes our electricity, your electricity, very, very expensive, which makes us uncompetitive. So you have the combination of a wrecked landscape. I'm about to have 220 acres of solar panels put right next to my house, right next to it. They tell me I can graze my sheep underneath them, but that land ought to be farmed properly, in my opinion. And you can see, or you should know by now, that the wind turbines are only 27% efficient. And of course, they produce the energy intermittently, unpredictably. You don't know when you're going to get it or when you're not. You're paying for all of this.
Some applause there, Andrew Duff, but I'm guessing that the Liberal Democrats and UKIP are not exactly in harmony on this issue.
Well, we aren't on this or on anything else, I think. But the key problem is to cut CO2 emissions. And yesterday, was it yesterday, in Strasbourg, we voted on the climate and the energy package for the next years. And the decision of the Parliament by a large majority, of which I was part, and I think Richard also, it was to install a binding commitment to cut carbon by 40%, which is a lot, and it requires experiments. And I would agree to some extent with Stuart that some of the experiments, some of the aspects of European climate and is the energy policy haven't worked very well, and we're still tweaking and modifying the trading submissions system. We're still experimenting with carbon capture and storage. Actually, that experiment hasn't really started yet, and it ought to be accelerated. We also have to appreciate, and here Rupert is fine on the analysis, but I think too simplistic on the solutions that he offers. We also have to appreciate that Europe is a very diverse place, and that things that will work in East Anglia won't in Greece or in Poland. To respond to your question on fracking, it is a foul technology, and I do hope it does not come to Britain. But it is to be a British decision of the British Parliament to proceed on fracking or not.
Well, I started this debate by raising the issue of whether Britain was becoming increasingly Eurosceptic, and Krinjan Khalid would like to ask us a question with anything. Krinjan, hi.
Mr. Duff, you're a steering member of the Spinelli Group in the European Parliament, which actively supports further EU federalisation. How is this group and the Liberal Democrat Party planning to react to the increasing Eurosceptic tendencies before the May election, and Messrs. Fassoulas, Howitt and Read might want to give their respective organisations opinions on that topic too?
Andrew, we'll come to you in a minute, but in fairness to Richard, I think it's his turn to begin. Richard, I mean, are you concerned at how many votes UKIP are going to get in this year's elections?
Am I concerned at the rise of UKIP? Yes. UKIP is a second Conservative party and it believes in privatisation of the National Health Service, bringing back the poll tax, bringing back fox hunting and all, ending comprehensive education and all the Conservative, right-wing Conservative policies. So as someone on the centre-left, the British Labour Party, of course, I'm concerned if a party like that begins to get a foothold. But I also am very concerned that they have skewed the debate about Europe. The truth is, Andrew, I respect Andrew's views. I don't go all the way with him and probably with the question on that. I don't believe in a federal Europe, neither does the Labour Party. We believe Europe is best as a collection of countries working together in friendship, in alliance, cooperating, but as separate countries. But what UKIP are doing is presenting this symbol that, it's about to become the United States of Europe. They sort of frighten people by trying to suggest that these decisions are taken from outside, imposed, it's all a conspiracy. You all know that. I apologise to all the foreign students in the audience. Just look at our newsstands and some of the things that are said about foreigners in this country that are insulting and offensive and are bad for community relations within the country and are bad for Britain's reputation outside. And the rise of UKIP and of the anti-European right in the Conservative Party, I'm afraid, are fanning up those flames of prejudice, of misunderstanding, scapegoating, of which I completely distance myself and the British Labour Party. So yes, I'm worried about the rise of UKIP, not because Labour hasn't got much better solutions for jobs, for business and for trade, for sustainability and the environment, for better transport links, but because they're misleading people in this debate about Europe. But it is great to see people in this audience putting the case for Europe, because this generation, your generation, studying now at university, many of you taking part in exchange programmes in other European countries with the financial support from the European Union, sitting in a building which is part funded by the European Union, in a project which is part funded by the European Union C Media, and looking forward to careers which will very often involve you travelling and communicating and having day-to-day contact with the rest of the European Union. You have the opportunity to make the case that we don't have to fear Europe. It's not what UKIP and the Tory Eurosceptic right say. It's just part of good business for Britain that can be good for all of us and for your generation, good for your future.
Rupert, what would you add to that?
Well, just to go back to what Richard's just been saying, why is UKIP on the rise? I suggest that a fundamental reason is because a lot of people are fed up with politics as usual in this country, fed up with the old three parties. And I say to those people, well, you're right to be fed up, but for goodness sake, can't we do a little bit better than a party that is, for example, in denial about whether man-made climate change is even happening? UKIP want to ban you from being able to be taught climate science in schools. That's their latest announcement on this. They want to ban the teaching of climate science in schools. That's how extreme they are. And I put it to you, there is an alternative. There is an alternative. These are proportional representation elections, the European elections. You can vote for what you want and you can get what you want. And I hope that what a lot of you are going to want to do is going to be to get the kind of thing that I've been presenting you with. What is our vision of Europe? To go back to the first question, our vision of Europe in the Greens is not a vision of a federal Europe. If you want a federal Europe, if you want a European superstate, if you want us to go into the Eurozone, because the logic of the Eurozone is a federal superstate, then you're best off voting for Mr. Duff. What we say in the Greens is, let's have a Europe of localities and a Europe of countries. Let's return powers where we can. Let's in particular work much harder to reduce the level of corporate power and the level of power of the bankers. UKIP talk a lot about, oh, we're giving all away our power to Brussels. Brussels isn't the half of it. The power that is owned by the rulers, the leaders of multinationals and the big bankers, that's the thing we ought to be really scared about. And Europe could do a lot better in targeting and in reducing that power. That's what we want to see, a Europe for people and not for corporations.
Petros, I mean, can you understand the views of people who would consider themselves to be pro-European but don't like the way that the EU is being run at present?
I must confess that the approval rating of the European Union at the moment is not the best in history, but ironically it's better than the approval rating of many national governments who actually do even worse when people are asked. And I do agree with you. There are areas where the European Union hasn't performed as well, not least in the current economic crisis. Even though The crisis has been unfolding for the past few years, and as Andrew said at the beginning, a lot has been done to improve the European economy. A lot more has to be done indeed. And the great thing about the European project is its constant tendency to reform and improve itself. It's nothing static. It's nothing that was taken off the shelf and served to the electorate as a take it or leave it. It constantly improves itself, it constantly reforms. See where we started in the late 1940s after a devastating war with the European coal and steel community. And look how far we have gone in delivering value for EU citizens, in improving the lives of everyday people in more ways than one. You know, cheaper roaming, cheaper holidays, the ability to study anywhere in Europe. We have the opportunity to make the EU work better. And as everybody said in this panel, these European elections are your chance to reform Europe according to your own vision of what the future should be like. So don't let anybody scare you, don't let anybody put you off, and certainly don't let anybody tell you that these elections don't matter. These elections matter very, very much. And whoever of these guys you want to send to Brussels, make sure that he or she will represent you and nobody else.
Stuart Agnew, I think I'm right in saying that in, for instance, Cambridgeshire, on Cambridgeshire County Council, there are now 11 UKIP councillors. Are you becoming more than just a protest party?
Oh, definitely, because we can offer a vision of this country not run by the European Union, which doesn't include privatisation of the health service, and it does include proper climate science in the universities, and not this business if carbon dioxide levels go up, then we're going to get rampant global warming. We want to see the fair share of the factors that include ocean currents, jet streams, lunar cycles and solar cycles with the overarching interglacial and glacial periods. That is what contributes to our weather, not just CO2 levels. I urge you to read all the emails that were leaked 4 years ago from the University of East Anglia. It's quite shocking, actually, for scientists to be like that. Now, can you just ask the second part of your question to me?
Are you becoming more...
Councillors, yes. 11 there, we had 15 here. I think 9 in Suffolk. That was very interesting because there are 3 levels to voting. You vote at local level, you vote at general election level, and you vote at European Parliament level in this country. Voters were prepared to risk their vote for UKIP 10 years ago in quite large numbers. Then, for the first time, last year, we saw them prepared to risk their vote at local elections for us. The hard nut to crack, of course, is the general election. We understand the fight that we are fighting, and we know it can only be won at the ballot box. All we can do is to put our policies in front of the voters and say, this is a choice for you. It's not our fault that the European Union has made difficulties in this country, but we have responded to a problem where the 3 main political parties all supported the idea of an overseas body, unelected body, actually proposing 75% of the laws that are enacted here. And we don't like that, and we say to you, we don't like it. Do you agree with us? And that's how democracy should work.
Andrew Duff, I mean, we've got a room full of very engaged young people here. There's an awful lot of very unengaged young people out there. How do you go about convincing them that Europe or any other political issue is something they should care about?
Yep. Well, I think this election campaign is going to be extremely interesting, and perhaps more so than previous ones. I think it's going to be more polarised between the left and the right because of the social consequences of the economic crisis, and it is going to be more polarised between the federalists, and I'm proud to be out as a federalist, and the nationalists. The fact of the matter is that if we do not strengthen the integration of the EU, especially firstly on fiscal matters, we risk falling apart. Do not believe that because the Union has been around all your lifetimes, it will always be so. Recall the frightful history of Europe that your fathers, grandfathers and great-grandfathers all suffered from. And prize the success of what we've been achieving over the last decades in terms of respect for peace, fundamental rights and democracy. It's not crazy to be a federalist. It's not the same thing, Rupert, as campaigning for a super state. I have never done that. A super state of the sort that you think of when you think of the Kremlin or Washington. We are more diverse here in Europe, and we have great strengths in our representative democracy, but we have to make it work to square up to the challenges of globalization, including, of course, climate. And the European integration is our own response to such a challenge. The thing we need now is stronger governance in Europe. But we have to make that profoundly democratic and transparent. And we aren't there yet. What we have is this opaque, split up executive, pretty bureaucratic in the Commission, a power struggle between the Commission and the Council.
Andrew, I'm going to have to cut in there. We're running out of time. Okay. We really are running out of time.
But we have to clarify matters and simplify them. And this campaign is the chance to do that.
Vicki, you've been very patient. How do you go about stopping Stuart's party stealing votes from your party and the other parties?
Well, I think we're at a very exciting time and a very important time. I think the European Union needs to change and our relationship with it needs to be changed and to be clarified. Now, why do I think it needs to change? Because on one hand, we have a huge opportunity. You live in a much freer world. You have access to information in a way my generation did, other generations. You can look across borders. The single market that we voted for back in 1975 is meant to be about opening up borders to trade, making companies easily able to trade across borders, okay? But it's not meant to be about putting barriers to business. So I would love it, Rupert, if your energy policy was possible, but it's not. I suspect every single person in this room has held a glass bottle in their hand in the past week or so. You know, glass beer, a Coke, a drink, you've held a glass bottle. 11 factories closing down in Europe, 19 opening on our borders. That glass is no longer being built here because of our energy policy. You look at policies after policy which are making us less competitive. I happen to be someone who believes the world doesn't end at the edge of Europe. You need to look at the global race, the global challenge. You need to look at the fact our economies are flatlining the past few years. China's up by 1/3, India by 2/3. That is a challenge. We need to have policies that help us to be more competitive. That is the change that we need. I want to try and hold on to that single market, the good bits, but only if it allows us all to get that competition which will allow you guys to get jobs and careers in the global world.
Vicki, I'm going to have to break.
Now, let me just carry on. One more moment. What we've learned today is that Andrew is a very good listener.
Vicki, we are going to run out of time.
He listened to me this morning. Richard has misquoted me on something this morning. And Andrew, you will attest to the fact that I did not say what he said because I'm very proud of our recycling in the east of England. So, Richard, after this meeting, I'll accept a written letter of apology.
That's fine.
You're against renewables targets. They've all walked out on you, Vicki.
Guys, I think we're in a position now to go over. I think we are now in a position to go over to the studios of Focus WTV, the regional broadcaster in West Flanders. In Belgium, people have to vote. It's been a legal obligation since the 1890s. What do they make of our debate so far? Hello guys, you're right.
Hello, my name is Lisa. In Belgium we have compulsory voting, and in the UK people are free to vote. But how are young people being encouraged to vote voluntarily, especially in the case of the European elections?
So Rupert, you, please.
Okay, two things. One, the young people must vote, because if they don't, as was said earlier, the opinions of older people will be more important than them as far as politicians are concerned. And that's really worrying. Secondly, Russell Brand said some wonderful things on Newsnight recently in Britain here. The one bad thing he said, I think, is don't vote. Do bear in mind that if Russell Brand were to vote, I'm quite confident he would vote Green. He loves Caroline Lucas. Thank you.
Petros, a sentence from you, please.
Well, if you want to shape your future, you have to show up and express your view. And elections are the best opportunity any of us has to do it. So it is your future, it is your vote. Exercise it, take control of it.
Stuart.
The postal vote was supposed to encourage people to vote. Unfortunately, it is able to be abused. And once you can abuse the democratic process, you've got a big problem. So I don't want to see any more postal voting personally, unless it's for people who simply are so immobile they cannot get to a polling station. Yes, we need to engage the younger people, and they've got the internet, there's everything there to do it, but I can't help feeling until they're really hard pressed, they really are worried about their futures, until that happens, they won't involve themselves.
Andrew.
Well, I have to say that I've always been in favour of voting at 16 years. And my only problem is that when I was 16, I was very interested in politics, but I was also a member of the Labour Party, which was a great mistake. And I'm now proud to be a liberal and to argue that in this election in May, you have a chance to declare yourself for Britain and indeed Belgium as modern European countries.
Vicki Ford, a very short answer from yourself, please.
The decisions which we're making today are going to affect your entire life. Okay? I believe it's time that we had a change, because I think that the European Union as we see it at the moment needs reform. We want to keep the big bits, the single market bit, change the rest of it. And that is what you'll be voting for, and then you will be voting on the right to get a big say, which is whether or not the reformed Europe is one that you still want to be a part of.
Richard Howard, final word to you.
On the issues, Lisa, unemployment across Europe is huge. And in this country, right, youth unemployment, in this region, which is thought to be prosperous, but for many people isn't, 1 in 6 young people under the age of 24 unemployed. And in the European Parliament, my party, Labour, and our sister parties championed the European Youth Guarantee to say that you can't be out of work or training for 4 months without being helped into it. And we provided money in the European budget, voted in the European Parliament to do it. And in this Conservative-led country, our British government missed the deadline to apply for the money. That is the clearest choice you will have at this European elections for your job, for your future.
So that's it for European Youth Questions from C Media. This year we mark the centenary of the First World War in Europe, a conflict in which millions died. A century on, as the United Kingdom is about to reconsider its own unity and the potential independence of Scotland, the political issues of independence or unity, European collaboration or national sovereignty remain as central as they ever were. Thank you and goodbye.